federal appeals court has ruled that most of the global tariffs that President Trump has put in place are illegal.
A majority of the judges agreed that Trump went beyond his authority as president by declaring national emergencies to impose taxes on imports from countries around the world.
Tariffs, courts, and Canada caught right in the middle. And this time, Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs, those very ones that shook global trade, have just been declared illegal by a U.S. federal appeals court. Yeah, you heard that right. A major chunk of his economic arsenal has been ruled unlawful, and the shockwaves are already hitting Washington, Wall Street, and Ottawa. The story begins with Canada. Because when Trump launched his tariff crusade, Ottawa was one of the first on the firing line. Trump used emergency powers to justify slapping duties on steel, aluminum, auto parts, and practically anything crossing the U.S. border. For Canada, America's closest trading partner, this wasn't just a trade scuffle, it was an economic earthquake. Billions in exports were immediately taxed. Companies scrambled to find workarounds, and retaliatory tariffs from Ottawa followed quickly. But now, after years of legal fights, judges in the United States are saying what Canada had been arguing all along. These tariffs were never legally justified in the first place. To set the timeline straight, Trump re-entered the White House in January 2025, and by February, he was already rolling out his so-called trafficking tariffs. He targeted Canada, Mexico, and China under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, known as IEEPA. He claimed the tariffs were necessary to crack down on fentanyl smuggling, to stop illegal immigration, and to balance America's trade deficit. But critics immediately raised the alarm. Tariffs are taxes on imports, and the U.S. Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to levy taxes. Then came April 2, 2025. Trump escalated further, announcing what he branded Liberation Day, a universal 10% tariff on nearly all imported goods, with higher rates for countries that hit back. Canada, already stung by February's measures, now found itself trapped in an escalating trade war it never wanted. Ottawa, alongside businesses on both sides of the border, started preparing lawsuits and trade challenges, but the real action unfolded in U.S. courts. By late spring, the lawsuits began landing like missiles. Importers argued that Trump had twisted IEEPA beyond recognition. That law, passed in 1977, was designed for targeted sanctions. Think freezing assets of hostile regimes or cutting off financial ties to adversaries in times of crisis. It was never intended to allow a president to rewrite America's entire trade policy overnight. The case, led by VOS Selections Inc. and supported by groups like the Liberty Justice Center, was filed in the U.S. Court of International Trade. And on May 28th, the court struck hard. Trump had exceeded his authority. His tariffs violated the law, but enforcement was paused while appeals moved forward. Summer brought the bigger showdown. On August 29, 2025, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit delivered its bombshell. In a 7-4 decision, the court upheld the lower ruling. Trump's tariffs under IEEPA, illegal, unconstitutional, beyond the scope of presidential power. The judges sent the case back to work out remedies, but stayed the decision until mid-October, giving the Trump administration time to appeal to the Supreme Court.
A majority of the judges agreed that Trump went beyond his authority as president by declaring national emergencies to impose taxes on imports from countries around the world. However, the court left the tariffs in place until mid-October. That gives the Trump administration the chance to appeal to the Supreme Court, which Donald Trump quickly vowed to do.
So here's the reality as of today. Canada, Mexico, China, Europe, every nation facing these tariffs remains under them for now. But the legal foundation is crumbling, and come October, those tariffs could vanish overnight. For Canada's exporters, from auto plants in Ontario to aluminum smelters in Quebec, this could be the break they've been waiting for. Billions in duties may be refunded, years of lost competitiveness could finally ease, and North America's supply chains may start healing. Why did the court strike down these tariffs? Because Trump stretched IEEPA far beyond what Congress ever intended. The appeals court found that tariffs are fundamentally fiscal measures, a kind of tax, and under U.S. law, only Congress holds the power of the purse. The president cannot simply declare a national emergency and start collecting billions from importers without congressional approval. Judges also ruled that the emergencies Trump cited, like fentanyl trafficking or general trade imbalances, were not legitimate reasons to impose tariffs across the board. That's not how the law works. This is not just a legal victory for importers, it's a constitutional showdown. It raises the bigger question, how far can a president go in reshaping trade policy without Congress? Trump pushed the boundaries, arguing that national security gave him near unlimited power, but the courts just pushed back, reminding Washington that there are limits to executive authority. The consequences are enormous. Economically, the tariffs had become a huge source of revenue. In July alone, the U.S. government collected over $28 billion in tariff payments, plugging budget holes and narrowing the trade deficit. If these duties vanish, that cash flow dries up and the Treasury may be forced to borrow more. Bond yields could rise, markets could wobble, and businesses who paid those tariffs are lining up for refunds that might run into the tens of billions. For Canada, this could be a turning point. Ottawa had already retaliated with tariffs on U.S. agricultural goods, whiskey, and other products, aiming to pressure Washington into rolling back its measures. But if the tariffs fall in October, Canada won't need to retaliate anymore. It could mean calmer trade waters, more stable markets, and renewed confidence in the U.S.-Canada economic partnership. And given how tightly linked the two economies are, that matters not just for governments, but for workers, businesses, and everyday consumers on both sides of the border. Here's a fascinating twist. Not all of Trump's tariffs are dead. The court ruling only applies to those enacted under IEEPA. Tariffs on steel and aluminum under Section 232, those national security duties first imposed back in 2018, remain untouched. So Canadian producers of metals and other commodities are still living under some restrictions, even as other sectors hope for relief. This legal battle is about the new wave of tariffs Trump unleashed in 2025, not the older measures still standing. So where do things stand? As of August 30, 2025, the tariffs are technically still active. Importers are still paying. Canada is still facing barriers. But legally, the tide has turned, and the Supreme Court now looms as the final battlefield. If Trump wins there, his tariff strategy survives. If he loses, history may mark this as one of the most dramatic rejections of executive overreach in modern U.S. trade policy. The stakes are high. Billions in refunds, shifts in global markets, the balance of power between Congress and the presidency, and the fate of U.S.-Canada trade relations all hang in the balance. This isn't just a court case. It's a fight over how America governs itself, how it treats its allies, and how far one man can bend the rules in the name of America first. So here we are. Trump's tariffs, once sold as a weapon to protect American jobs, now stand on the brink of collapse. A 7-4 appeals court ruling has declared them illegal. Canada, once the punching bag, could soon be the biggest beneficiary. And the world is watching what happens when the Supreme Court finally takes up the question. Does a president have the power to rewrite trade law with the stroke of a pen, or must even Donald Trump bow to the Constitution? The clock is ticking, and October is just around the corner. What do you think? Will the Supreme Court back Trump or uphold the appeals court ruling? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dive stories that cut through the noise.